These are the movies so bad they bankrupt studios, ended careers, and wasted enough money to fund a small country. Every year since the 70s, Hollywood managed to greenlight something dumber, uglier, and more expensive than the last. This is that list. Mae West's final movie is one of the most surreal train wrecks ever committed to film. She was 85 years old, nearly deaf, disoriented, and so far gone that crew members had to crouch behind the furniture holding cue cards just to get her through a scene. None of her dialogue could be salvaged. Every line was dubbed in post, and not even by her. Several actors said she genuinely had no idea who they were, even while filming with them. The whole thing was based on her stage play, but no studio wanted to touch it. Eventually, the filmmakers gave up and released it themselves at the Cinerama Dome in Hollywood. Final box office haul was less than 50 grand. By the time the Concorde hit theaters, the airport franchise was already limping. But this was the movie that finally shot it in the head. This time, the disaster film genre had a new trick: turn the Concorde into a fighter jet. Real Concorde pilots called the flying scenes physically impossible, insulting, and hallucinatory. George Kennedy was reportedly drunk half the time and ad-libbed most of his lines. Air France was so embarrassed, they banned the movie from being shown on their flights. The original airport made over $100 million. This one barely cleared 13. Michael Cimino, fresh off The Deer Hunter, was given complete control. What followed was one of the most chaotic productions in Hollywood history. He had the town set rebuilt because the buildings were 6 inches too tall. He forced an extra to shave between takes just to reset beard continuity. He shot over 1.3 million feet of film, the equivalent of 220 hours of raw footage. The original cut of the movie was 5 hours and 25 minutes. United Artists took it away and recut it without Cimino's permission. It was too late. The damage was done. The movie tanked so badly it bankrupted United Artists. Back in the 80s, this was the most expensive comedy ever made, with no real star power behind it, but a whole lot of mess behind the scenes. Director John Schlesinger had entire buildings in Mount Dora painted bright pink to match his vision of a desperate tourist trap. For one gag, they blew up a real 4-lane bridge. There's a scene with a water-skiing elephant. Crew members didn't even try to hide their confusion. They called it the most expensive inside joke in history, and they weren't wrong. Final box office total was just $2 million. $22 million gone, and all we got was an elephant on water skis. Almost every dollar of Inchon's $46 million budget came from the Unification Church, run by Reverend Sun Myung Moon. He personally cast Laurence Olivier, who was very sick at the time, and paid him a cool $1 million to star. They filmed Olivier through layers of gauze and soft filters just to hide how bad he looked. The Pentagon read the script and immediately backed away. Olivier later called it, quote, an appalling experience, and said he only did it for the paycheck. The movie took 4 years to make and was so bad, it was yanked from theaters and never released on home video or DVD. The New York Times called it the most expensive B-movie ever made. This was supposed to be the next Star Wars. Instead, it became one of the biggest studio faceplants of the decade. Krull cost $47 million and made barely $16.5 million. The production was a mess. The villain got redesigned halfway through the shoot. Half the budget was blown on that alone. They had to rent Pinewood's James Bond stages and build 2 more just to fit the bloated sets. Toy companies were supposed to make a line of merchandise, but no one even told them the film existed. What's left is a weird mashup of fantasy and sci-fi that tried to be everything and ended up being nothing. This was meant to be Coppola's big comeback. What it turned into was an FBI-level disaster. The original cut ran 2.5 hours and gave equal weight to the black and white characters. But producer Robert Evans demanded it be recut to push the black cast into the background. The whole thing spiraled. One of the private investors was later murdered. The project got tangled in an FBI investigation involving drugs, Ponzi schemes, and an alleged murder-for-hire plot. It cost $58 million and made less than half. Coppola eventually restored his original cut, but it took 36 years. This Revolutionary War epic was doomed the moment someone cast Al Pacino in period costume and then let him stomp through history in modern boots. He refused to wear proper footwear, so the crew just shot him from the knees up. Director Hugh Hudson only had 3 months to rewrite and shoot the whole thing. The reviews were brutal. One critic called it the worst performance of Pacino's career. The film made $358,000 at the US box office. The budget was $28 million. After this, Pacino vanished from acting for 4 years. This was Marvel's first theatrical movie. It was produced by George Lucas, and it is absolute madness. The animatronic duck suit barely worked. It needed 4 puppeteers just to move the face. Lucas dropped $2 million on that thing and told the studio, "Kids will love it." But instead, the movie bombed so hard that Frank Price resigned as Universal's president right after it opened. But there's one strange silver lining. Lucas, deep in debt from the movie and building Skywalker Ranch, ended up selling the CGI division of Lucasfilm to Steve Jobs. That little side company, it became Pixar. This thing was dead before it even hit theaters. Dustin Hoffman and Warren Beatty fought on set constantly. Elaine May, who directed it, was filming hundreds of takes per scene. At one point, someone had the genius idea to airlift a live camel by helicopter, just for one joke. They never even used the shot. The movie's about 2 washed-up American songwriters who stumble into a CIA mess in Morocco. It had delays, cost overruns, and 2 stars who couldn't stop getting in each other's way. No wonder it only made $14 million on a budget of $55 million. Terry Gilliam went full chaos on this one. The sets were so overbuilt they ran out of space and had to rent a tennis stadium. Crew stopped getting paid. Robin Williams demanded his name be taken off the credits, so he shows up as Ray D. Tudo. The producer even faked the budget numbers to keep Columbia Pictures from pulling the plug. It actually got 4 Oscar nominations for art direction, costumes, visual effects, and makeup. But the production burned so much money, there was no way to recover. It made $8 million domestic and ended up with a $38.5 million loss. This was the year Clint Eastwood said yes to a movie just so the studio would leave his passion project alone. They threatened to pull funding for Bird. He didn't want to do it. You can tell. Pink Cadillac, in which Eastwood plays a California bounty hunter, was a low point. They kept rewriting scenes on the day, mostly to add car chases and explosions, but they never touched the dialogue. Later on, Eastwood said it wasn't even worth talking about. And yeah, he's right. The movie's a mess. It made $12 million on a $19 million budget. The studio buried it and never looked back. Brian De Palma got completely steamrolled here. He was forced to cast Tom Hanks in a role that was supposed to be a smug, arrogant Wall Street guy. But since it was Hanks, they rewrote the character to be likable. Morgan Freeman replaced a Jewish judge from the book because the studio thought they needed to balance the cast. Bruce Willis was so unbearable on set, the crew called him the virus. The press wasn't allowed anywhere near the production, so they rented a space across the street and filmed the meltdown in secret. The movie flopped hard, just $15 million against a $47 million budget. But the book about how badly it failed, The Devil's Candy, ended up being a hit. The behind-the-scenes drama did better than the movie. Bruce Willis managed to follow one disaster with another, and this one was his alone. He co-wrote the script, rewrote scenes during filming, and insisted on timing everything to swing music, even the action. He couldn't decide if it was a comedy, an action flick, or a musical, so they just did all 3. Studio execs gave him a blank check and didn't ask questions. By day 2, the crew was calling it Bruce's Vanity Bomb. It made $7 million opening weekend, got shredded by critics, and never recovered. It lost nearly $90 million. In the UK, they called it Accidental Hero, but most people just called it Forgettable. It's one of those movies in Dustin Hoffman's filmography nobody ever talks about. Production was a disaster from the jump. The script got rewritten 3 times after filming had already started. Hoffman demanded final say on the edit, and then refused to show up for reshoots. He and Geena Davis ended up in a screaming match in a hotel overline changes. And when the original ending tanked at test screenings, the studio went behind the director's back and reshot the ending without even telling him. The film barely cleared $19 million, not even halfway to its budget. This one should have been a hit. The first film was a box office success, critics liked the sequel even more, and it's since developed a cult following. But in 1993, Paramount completely torpedoed it. They dropped it in theaters just 1 week after Mrs. Doubtfire. The studio also panicked about an electrocution gag at summer camp and almost got slapped with an R rating from the MPAA. Executives then made the brilliant decision to slash the ad budget in half at the last minute. Test screenings scored even higher than the original, but it didn't matter. At the box office, it made less than half of what the first film did. This one's a weird, offensive mess about a boy shopping for new parents. But Rob Reiner saw it coming. He literally asked critics to go easy before the movie even came out. It didn't help. Roger Ebert gave it 0 stars and wrote, "I hated this movie. Hated every simpering, stupid, vacant, audience-insulting moment of it." Reiner has defended North for years, saying it was just meant to be a lighthearted fable, and people were expecting something bigger from him. That may be true, but it didn't stop the movie from tanking and marking the beginning of a long slump in his directing career. Where do we even begin with this one? Rennie Harlin fired the original male lead right before filming, replaced him with a last-minute choice, then cast his wife, Geena Davis, as the star. During production, everything went wrong. Sets collapsed, the monkey bit Davis. MGM ran out of money halfway through the marketing campaign, so the posters were printed in black and white. The film opened to just over $2 million and only made it to $10 million total. The final blow came 3 weeks after release, when the studio literally went bankrupt. Cutthroat Island even held the Guinness World Record for biggest box office bomb in history, for years. Nobody was asking for a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story told from the housekeeper's point of view. But they made it anyway. Julia Roberts tried out an Irish accent for the role, hated it, then begged to dub over it in post. Sony said no. The original cut ran over 2 hours, but Roberts' agent forced a recut to shift the focus onto her close-ups. By the time the movie limped into theaters, the director, Stephen Frears, had completely disowned it. Critics tore it apart, and it ended up losing a massive chunk of its budget for the studio. After the whole Waterworld debacle, you'd think Costner would ease up a little. Instead, he doubled down with The Postman. Costner's ego was on a rampage here. He built full towns in the Utah desert for wide shots and then cut them from the movie. He insisted on a runtime just shy of 3 hours and refused to trim a single frame. Even after test audiences hated the ending, he kept it anyway. It was a dystopian film, based on a short story about a post-apocalyptic America, way before that genre blew up with The Hunger Games. But it didn't matter, audiences didn't buy what Costner was selling. The movie collapsed at the box office, earning back just a quarter of its bloated budget. Oprah put her own money into Beloved and refused to take studio notes, including cuts to the film's 3-hour runtime. First test screening? Half the audience walked out. Then it opened against Bride of Chucky and got steamrolled. Based on Toni Morrison's novel about a woman haunted by her past and literal ghosts, the film was critically well received, 78% on Rotten Tomatoes. But Disney took a loss anyway. Beloved opened with just $8 million and dropped 50% the following weekend. That was it. Disney wrote it off. This thing started life as Eaters of the Dead. Test screenings were so bad that Michael Crichton personally fired director John McTiernan and reshot nearly a third of the movie himself. The score was scrapped, the title changed. Antonio Banderas never saw a full script, and to this day, the original cut is lost. Crichton, McTiernan, Banderas. This had all the ingredients for a hit. But the budget exploded, the marketing flopped, and the audience never showed up. Final tally? $160 million to make. Barely $60 million earned, one of the biggest money losers of the decade. This one ended an entire animation studio. Fox had no faith in it. No toys, no merchandise, no cross-promotion. Brad Bird was offered the script and passed immediately, called it dead on arrival. The film tried blending traditional animation with early CG, but the team ran out of time to finish over 300 shots. It opened. It flopped. 10 days later, Fox Animation closed its doors. Even though it had a hit with Anastasia in 1997, Titan took a $100 million loss, and that was the end of the line. Square spent 4 years trying to make a photorealistic CGI movie with no real connection to the games. They cast Alec Baldwin as the lead and didn't tell fans who he was playing. He didn't know either. The director created a digital actress he hoped to use in future films. She was never used again. The movie bombed so badly, Square canceled their Hollywood division, shut down their animation studio in Hawaii, and had to merge with Enix just to survive. Total loss, almost $95 million. Pluto Nash kicked off a whole streak of flops for Eddie Murphy, each one worse than the last. Shot in 2000, shelved for 2 years, and quietly dumped in August 2002. Cost $100 million, made 7, not 70, 7. Eddie Murphy played a nightclub owner on the moon. That's it, that's the movie. Mobsters want his moon club, he says no, chaos ensues. The test screenings were a disaster. The studio tried reshoots, tried pushing the release back, nothing worked. By the time it limped into theaters, Murphy didn't even bother promoting it. Years later, he said the only reason he did it was because he bought a house with the check. Sinbad was supposed to be the next big animated adventure. Brad Pitt signed on without reading the script, literally admitted it, and halfway through production their animation tech broke. The result was a weird blend of hand-drawn and emergency patch CGI that looked awkward then and hasn't aged a day better. It bombed hard. DreamWorks lost $125 million, and Katzenberg blamed it on boys not liking animation anymore. That didn't fly. DreamWorks shut down their 2D division right after, and pivoted to fully CG. The next films were Shrek 2 and Madagascar. That's how fast they backed away from Sinbad. Disney wanted a family-friendly, PG-13 Alamo movie, just a squeaky-clean historical massacre. Director John Lee Hancock shot 2 different R-rated cuts. Disney rejected both. Meanwhile, Russell Crowe was attached to Star, demanded rewrites, then bailed 2 weeks before shooting. The crew built a massive $10 million replica of the Alamo, only for most of it to be erased digitally in post. They ended up with Billy Bob Thornton and Patrick Wilson as Crockett and Travis. The movie tanked at the box office, and when you factor in marketing, it lost Disney over $146 million. Adjusted for today, that's close to $200 million down the drain. Sony tried to keep the budget a secret until after opening weekend. Smart move, because this movie was a total write-off. The plot is as dumb as it sounds. An AI drone learns to love music and then starts murdering people. It had a big cast. Jamie Foxx, Jessica Biel, Josh Lucas. Didn't matter. Stealth was dead on arrival. They built a full-size AI stealth jet, then realized it wouldn't fit through the hangar doors. Jessica Biel went through weapons training for a big action sequence that got cut. It opened in 4th place, behind Wedding Crashers, Sky High, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Absolutely no shot at survival. This disaster at sea epic is definitely no Titanic. It was supposed to be a high-tech remake of the Poseidon adventure. What they got was a bloated mess that lost $83 million and got itself a Razzie nomination. Production was chaos. Wolfgang Petersen burned through $20 million on a 10-minute sequence that didn't even make the final cut. The rotating set jammed up, trapping extras upside down. Josh Lucas later said they were rewriting the script while shooting, sometimes mid-scene, and despite all that, the studio was already planning a franchise, before the movie even came out. The most expensive comedy ever made, and that record still stands. $175 million for a sequel nobody asked for. Steve Carell replaced Jim Carrey, and Lauren Graham replaced Jennifer Aniston. The result? A giant, watery flop. They built a full-size ark, then ran out of money and left it abandoned for 3 months. Steve Carell had to film alongside hundreds of live animals, many of which relieved themselves all over him. And it didn't even break even. Not even close. The Wachowskis wanted to make something bold with Speed Racer, and they definitely did that, just not in the way Warner Brothers was hoping. They brought in never-before-used digital rigs that broke constantly, had crew members wear color-coded outfits so they could be chroma keyed out of reflections, and handed the editing team over 1,800 VFX shots with no locked script. The movie looked like an arcade machine exploded on screen, and while critics praised the visuals, most agreed the story was a mess. Years later, Emile Hirsch admitted he didn't know what was going on half the time during production, and you can tell. Will Ferrell, time travel, CGI dinosaurs, and absolutely zero idea who this movie was for. Land of the Lost is based on a 1970s kids show, but Ferrell improvised his way through most of it, and the final product ended up too raunchy for children and too stupid for adults. Test audiences hated the tone so much that Universal recut the trailer to make it look like a family film. The final version made less than $70 million, and Universal lost over $30 million on it. A few years later, the then president of Universal said it flat out. It was just crap. There was no excuse for it. This one was marketed as a Christmas movie for kids, and it had Nazi rats, sharks, a singing Albert Einstein, and absolutely no ballet. It's not surprising it couldn't find its audience. They redubbed Elle Fanning's voice with a British accent, but used someone else to do it. The director credited Tchaikovsky for the original story, and when the reviews rolled in, he called critics morons and blind dogs. The result? $16 million at the box office against a $90 million budget. At the time, Mars Needs Moms held the title for the worst box office return of any Disney movie ever made. They spent $150 million on a motion capture movie that looked like it crawled straight out of the uncanny valley. Seth Green played the lead kid, but they dubbed over his voice with a child actor, which threw off the lip sync and made everything feel even creepier. The film crashed with less than $40 million at the box office. Time magazine estimated the loss at $140 million in 2012 dollars, about $191 million today. Disney shut down Robert Zemeckis' Image Movers studio immediately afterward. John Carter was supposed to launch a massive sci-fi franchise. What they got instead was one of the biggest box office disasters in studio history. The concept was already a hard sell. Civil War veteran wakes up on Mars and finds himself in the middle of a war between 10-foot-tall aliens. The marketing was a complete mess. No one knew what the movie was even about. Test screenings bombed so badly, they cut a new trailer the week of release. Director Andrew Stanton, fresh off Finding Nemo, demanded round after round of reshoots, even after the sets had already been torn down. It was supposed to be a trilogy. What they got was a second-quarter write-down of $200 million. Universal spent $175 million on a samurai epic, then decided the story wasn't exciting enough, so they added a witch, a demon deer, and a CGI dragon. They called it a fantasy action adventure and aimed it squarely at global teens. The result? 47 Ronin, one of the most miscalculated flops of the decade. The legend it's based on is well known in Japan, but not anywhere else. And when they cast Keanu Reeves in the lead role, Japanese audiences bailed instantly. The film was so botched that Keanu wasn't even in the original ending. They CG inserted him during reshoots. The director was completely locked out of the editing room. The movie barely broke $150 million worldwide. A disaster on every possible level. Legends of Oz pulled in just $3.7 million its opening weekend, finishing with a worldwide total that didn't even crack a third of its production budget. It wasn't just a flop, it was a scam. The shady studio behind it strong-armed pension funds into investing. Animators went unpaid for months. The voice cast, Dan Aykroyd, Patrick Stewart, the works, recorded their lines with no context, no footage, nothing. Behind the scenes, there were accusations of embezzlement, and publicly, the team promised it would be bigger than Frozen. What they delivered was a $70 million embarrassment that no one wanted to admit existed. Another year, another reboot that tanked. Studio execs pitched this one as a dark reboot with a Moulin Rouge vibe. What they delivered was Hugh Jackman in eyeliner singing Nirvana with a children's choir. The backlash started early, especially after they cast Rooney Mara, a white woman, as Tiger Lily, a Native American character. Director Joe Wright later admitted he still has no idea what the movie was supposed to be. The result was a prequel to Peter Pan that cost $150 million and made even less. There are bad remakes, and then there's Ben-Hur. They took a 4-hour Oscar-winning epic and tried to turn it into a 2-hour action flick with CGI chariot races and slow-motion sword fights. Morgan Freeman wandered around with what looked like a mop on his head, and somehow, that was the least ridiculous thing in the movie. Audiences didn't bite. Critics didn't either. 25% on Rotten Tomatoes and less than $100 million worldwide. The studio tried to reframe it as a faith-based movie after the fact, calling it a miss for the Christian market. Nobody bought that spin, and the film disappeared without a trace. Warner Brothers handed Guy Ritchie $175 million to reimagine the Arthurian legend, with Cockney slang, kung fu fight scenes, and CGI elephants. They even gave David Beckham a speaking role. Charlie Hunnam played Arthur. Jude Law did his best as the evil king. None of it mattered. It turns out that audiences just didn't want to see another reboot of The Legend of King Arthur. Opening weekend brought in just $15.4 million. Warner Brothers pulled the plug on their 6-movie franchise plan immediately. Final losses were estimated at around $150 million. It's still one of the worst-performing tentpole movies the studio ever released. This one had Peter Jackson's name on it, but not much else. He produced. The director was a total unknown. The script went through 6 rewrites. They spent a fortune building a giant mobile city set, and then barely filmed any of it. Actors were cast late and rushed through training. Jackson reportedly knew it was a mess and refused to promote it properly. The film was based on a 2001 young adult novel about predator cities roaming the Earth after a global war. Audiences didn't get it, didn't care, and didn't show up. It opened to $7.5 million, dropped 76% the next weekend, and limped to an $83 million worldwide total. Deadline estimated over $100 million in losses. This was supposed to be the next Lego movie. It turned out to be a 90-minute commercial with no jokes, no style, and no direction. They spent $75 million making it. Daniel Radcliffe voiced a spy character who sings and dances like he's in a bad Fortnite knockoff. The marketing was non-existent. Some theaters got the wrong cut of the film. On opening weekend in the US, it made just $670,000. That's across more than 2,000 screens, lowest per theater average ever for a wide release. Final box office worldwide was just $16.3 million. Critics called it the worst box office flop of all time. But they just didn't know what's going to happen next. There's no single flop to point to in 2020. The whole industry went off a cliff. Thanks to the pandemic, most major releases either went straight to streaming or sat on the shelf. Studios lost hundreds of millions across the board. Mulan, Wonder Woman, 1984, Dolittle, Tenet, all of them were supposed to be big earners. None of them even got a fair shot. We'll never know exactly how much money was lost that year, but the entire box office was basically a black hole. Filmed in 2017, sat on a shelf for 4 years. That should tell you everything. Chaos Walking was based on a young adult trilogy no one explained properly. Not to audiences, and clearly not to the studio either. Test audiences were so confused they didn't know what they just watched. So, Lionsgate spent another $15 million on reshoots, and didn't even invite the original director back. Tom Holland and Daisy Ridley were coming off Spider-Man and Star Wars, and yet the movie barely made a dent. Less than a year later, Holland starred in No Way Home and brought the box office roaring back with a $1.9 billion haul. But Chaos Walking couldn't even crack $30 million. Strange World is one of the biggest flops in Disney's history. The marketing team didn't know what to do with it. Halfway through the campaign, they quietly stopped pushing the movie. Test audiences said it felt like Journey to the Center of the Earth without any of the fun. And inside Disney, nobody could figure out who the movie was even for. Even with voice talent like Jake Gyllenhaal, Dennis Quaid, Gabrielle Union, and Lucy Liu, Strange World opened to a record-low $18 million across Thanksgiving weekend. Final global gross was just $73 million. Losses came in at $197 million. For the second year in a row, Disney claimed the biggest box office disaster. The Marvels wasn't just a flop. It was the first sign the MCU might actually be running out of steam. Brie Larson filmed most of her scenes without a full script. Scenes were rewritten daily, major reshoots, whole characters and plot threads got cut, and the director had already moved on to her next project before post-production was finished. It opened lower than any MCU film before it. Bob Iger publicly admitted Marvel was oversaturated, and this was the movie that proved it. The final budget, including marketing, reportedly crossed $450 million. The film made just $206 million. The original Joker made over $1 billion and won Joaquin Phoenix an Oscar. A sequel was guaranteed, but this time they shot it as a musical. Half the crew didn't even know until filming had already started. Lady Gaga's musical numbers were filmed on massive custom-built sets, some costing over $15 million each. After bad test screenings, most of those sequences had to be reshot. When the film premiered at festivals, audiences didn't understand the ending, so it was rewritten. Joker 2 opened domestically in October and flopped hard out of the gate. Just 25 days later, it was dumped on streaming. Total worldwide gross was $207 million, and insiders estimate a final loss of $144 million.